The loudest person in the room almost never wins. They think they do. They walk away from conversations convinced they dominated because everyone heard them. But hearing and respecting are two entirely different things. And the person who talked the most, revealed the most, and emoted the most is almost always the one who handed the room the most ammunition to use against them later. The person who won that room was the quiet one. The one who said little but absorbed everything. The one whose stillness made everyone else nervous enough to keep filling the silence with their own secrets, their own weaknesses, their own hands laid face up on the table, while the quiet one watched and catalogued and waited for exactly the right moment to act. Most people have never been taught to play the long game in any meaningful way. School rewards the one who raises their hand fastest. Workplaces reward the one who speaks most confidently in meetings. Social environments reward the one who fills every room with their personality. And so the habit of loudness builds and compounds through childhood, through adolescence, through adulthood, until the person genuinely believes that visibility equals power, that the most heard voice in any room is the most influential one, that the game is won by whoever performs most impressively. It is not. It has never been. And the people who actually accumulate lasting influence, who outlast their louder peers in every environment that matters, figured this out, not from a book, not from a course, but from the painful observation that every time they played loud, they handed away something valuable, and every time they played quiet, they gathered something they could use. You've been playing the game on the wrong setting your entire life, and the most devastating part is that you never even knew a different setting existed. This is the truth that the reactive, the impulsive, and the emotionally transparent never learn, and the strategically quiet never have to be taught. That playing quiet is not passivity, that moving smart is not timidity, and that the person who builds the habit of strategic restraint, while everyone around them burns their energy on performance and noise, wins not just the moment, but the long game, in every room, in every relationship, in every negotiation, in every circumstance where someone has to make a move and someone else has to respond to it. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513 from a place of complete political ruin. He had been stripped of his position in Florence, tortured on the strappato, a grueling interrogation method in which his arms were bound behind his back and he was suspended by them, exiled to his farm outside the city, and reduced to watching the political world he had moved through with extraordinary skill from the outside. He had served Florence for 15 years as a senior official and diplomat, traveled to the courts of France and Germany and the Italian states, met kings and popes and condottieri, and watched more closely than almost anyone alive how power moved between people in the real world rather than the world of philosophy and moral theory. And what he produced in that exile was not a lament, but a masterclass, a cold-eyed, precise, unsentimental map of how power actually moves between people, how the quiet outmaneuver the loud, how the patient outlast the impulsive, and how the person who understands human nature deeply enough to use it, rather than be used by it, wins everything that matters in the end. 7 strategies, 7 ways of thinking and moving through the world that Machiavelli documented 5 centuries ago, and that behavioral science, negotiation research, and the documented psychology of power have spent the last century quietly confirming were right all along. By the time this is over, you will understand not just what these strategies are, but why they work at the level of human psychology, why the brain responds to them the way it does, why most people never use them, and how you can begin applying them starting today. Before we go any further, if you are watching this right now and something in that opening already landed somewhere real in you, do one quick thing before we get into this. Hit the like button, not as a courtesy, but because this kind of content only finds the people who need it when you signal to the platform that it was worth your time. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every video on this channel is built from the ground up to give you the psychological tools that change how you actually move through the world, not just how you think about it. And here is something genuine. Where in the world are you right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments. It matters more than you think. Because right now, someone in Manchester is watching this at 11 at night, after a day that cost them more than it should have. Someone in Houston is watching at 5 in the morning, before anyone else in their house is awake, carving out an hour for themselves before the world takes everything else. Someone in Lagos, in Toronto, in Melbourne, in Glasgow, is watching this in a moment that belongs only to them. Tell us where you are and what time it is. This community is built from those moments, from people in every corner of the world deciding that playing quiet and moving smart is the life they want. And that community starts in the comments, right now. Strategy 1. Conceal your intentions until the moment you act. Machiavelli wrote it plainly. No proceeding is better than that which you have concealed from the enemy until the time you have executed it. He wrote this in The Art of War, and he meant it with the full operational weight of someone who had watched plans collapse, not because they were bad plans, but because they were spoken plans, announced plans, visible plans that gave every interested party time to organize a counter-move before the first move had even been made. Most people tell too much. Not because they are reckless, but because the impulse to share plans, goals, and intentions is woven into the social fabric of almost every culture. It feels connective, it feels honest, it feels like trust. And in genuinely safe relationships with genuinely loyal people, it can be all of those things. But most rooms are not filled with genuinely loyal people. They are filled with people who are, as Machiavelli observed with 5 centuries of accuracy, primarily self-interested, primarily motivated by their own ambitions, and perfectly capable of using your disclosed intention to position themselves at an advantage before you have had a chance to execute it. The psychology behind this strategy is documented in modern behavioral science with an uncomfortable clarity. Research on what psychologists call goal disclosure, the tendency to announce intentions publicly before achieving them, shows that the social acknowledgement you receive when you tell people what you plan to do activates a portion of the psychological reward that was meant to arrive only upon completion. Your brain gets a taste of the satisfaction before the work is done, and that early taste, small as it is, quietly diminishes the hunger that was driving you toward the goal. You handed away your own motivation by talking about it. The work becomes marginally less urgent because the social reward of having declared it has already been partially collected. This is not a character flaw. It is how the reward system of the brain responds to social feedback. The same mechanism that makes encouragement from other people feel good in the short term can function, in the absence of self-awareness, as a slow leak in the engine of your ambition. But there is a darker dimension too, the one Machiavelli was specifically concerned with. When you tell people what you are planning, you are not just managing your own psychology, you are informing the psychology of everyone listening. And everyone listening is simultaneously running their own calculation about how your plan affects their interests, their position, their goals. Consider the historical example Machiavelli would have appreciated. John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, during the War of the Spanish Succession, wanted to invade France through a specific road. A fort stood in the way. Rather than destroying the fort himself, which would have revealed his intentions, he captured it and held it, making the French believe he intended to use it as a fortified position. The French recaptured and burned it, eliminating the obstacle for him. Churchill planned this entirely. The path into France was now open, and the French did not expect him to take it. That is not deception for its own sake. That is the operational understanding that people respond to what they believe is true, and that the person who controls what others believe about their intentions controls how others position themselves, which determines who has the advantage when the actual move is made. The colleague who smiles warmly at your news about the promotion you are going for is, in the same moment, deciding whether to support you or subtly obstruct you. The friend who celebrates your new business idea is also calculating whether it competes with anything they care about. This is not cynicism. This is simply how human beings work when their own interests are involved, which they always are. The quiet strategist keeps their plans inside until execution makes announcing them irrelevant. Until the thing is done, the position is secured, the deal is closed, and then lets the accomplished fact speak for itself. Results do not need to be defended the way intentions do. Results change the room without giving the room a chance to change the results first. Strategy 2. Control what people see, and you control how they respond. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote what is arguably his most quoted and least understood observation, that everyone sees what you appear to be, but few experience what you really are. This is not, as it is often read, an instruction in dishonesty. It is an instruction in perception management, in understanding that the social world responds almost entirely to appearances rather than realities, and that the person who curates their appearance with the same care a craftsman brings to their work is the person who controls the terms of every interaction they enter. Research published in social psychology journals establishes this with precision that Machiavelli himself would have recognized. People make judgments about other people's competence, trustworthiness, and authority within seconds of meeting them, not from the content of what the person says, but from the nonverbal information the person projects, from posture and eye contact and vocal pace, and the energy they carry into the room before they have said a word. Research on vocal behavior found that individuals who perceived themselves as socially dominant modulated their voices in ways that communicated that dominance to listeners. Lower pitch, steadier delivery, a pace that did not rush to fill silence, while individuals who perceived themselves as lower in the hierarchy showed precisely the opposite patterns. And those initial judgments, formed in seconds, are extraordinarily difficult to revise. What psychologists call the primacy effect, the tendency for first impressions to anchor all subsequent evaluations in their direction even when contradicting evidence later appears. This means the most powerful moment in any interaction is the moment before it begins. What you bring into the room before you speak, the signal you're bearing broadcasts before your words have a chance to complicate it. Machiavelli understood that the ruler who enters a room with the bearing of certainty, with the composed stillness of someone who knows what they came for and is not anxious about whether they will get it, has already won the psychological opening of every interaction they will ever have. The ruler who enters flustered, eager, visibly hungry for approval or uncertain of their own standing, this person has already lost the first move before anyone else has played. What you allow people to see of you is also a choice, and most people never consciously make it. They default to transparency, not from a considered position, but from the unexamined habit of sharing whatever they feel, revealing whatever is on their mind, and trusting that the room will receive it generously. Machiavelli was not arguing that this transparency is morally wrong. He was arguing that it is strategically costly in any environment where other people's interests do not perfectly align with yours, which is most environments, most of the time. What you share freely becomes ammunition for others. What you withhold remains yours. The strategy is not performance in the hollow, anxious sense, the manufactured confidence that vibrates with the tension of someone who knows they are faking it. People read that kind of performance almost immediately, and what they read is not confidence, but the fear beneath it. And fear beneath a performance of confidence is precisely the impression the strategy is supposed to prevent. The strategy is the slow, deliberate cultivation of the internal state that produces the external bearing. The genuine quiet of someone who has done the work, who knows what they know, who has prepared and waited, and is now simply present in the moment that preparation was for. Reputation, in Machiavelli's framework, is armor, built slowly, guarded fiercely, and lost almost instantly the moment self-control fails, and the performance cracks to reveal the anxiety underneath. Build the internal thing first. The perception follows naturally, and naturally is the only way it holds. Strategy 3. Let others speak first and they will hand you everything you need. The Harvard Program on Negotiation, one of the most cited research institutions on the science of how humans reach agreements, has documented this with the kind of precision that practitioners of strategic silence have always known intuitively. The party that speaks first in a negotiation, that volunteers their position before hearing the other side's, that shows their hand before the hand needs to be shown, consistently underperforms the party that listens longer, asks more, and moves only when they have accumulated sufficient intelligence to move with purpose. Machiavelli wrote about this in the context of counsel. He argued that a prince must ask questions specifically to draw out honest information from the people around him. and that the prince who speaks too much in the company of his advisors will receive only what those advisors think he wants to hear, because people calibrate what they say to what the listener has already revealed they believe. The moment you show your position, everyone in the room adjusts their communication toward it. The moment you stay quiet, they move by their own compass, which tells you exactly where their compass points. This is one of the most practically valuable insights Machiavelli ever put to paper, and most people do the precise opposite of it every single day. They walk into conversations already speaking, volunteering their opinions before anyone asked, stating their case before they have heard the counter case, revealing their priorities before they have identified the other parties. And in doing so, they give away the one asset that was theirs to keep, the information asymmetry, the advantage of knowing more than the other side knows about what they know. Research published in the Journal of Applied Psychology on silence in negotiation found that pausing deliberately, even for as few as 3 seconds before responding, shifts the negotiator from a reactive mode of processing into a reflective mode, producing measurably better decisions, greater insight into the other party's actual priorities, and outcomes that serve the silent party significantly better than comparable negotiations conducted at the pace of reflex. The University of Groningen published research establishing that for most people, 4 seconds of silence in conversation begins to feel uncomfortable, begins to generate the social pressure to fill the void, to say something, to offer information that was not asked for simply to relieve the tension that the silence creates. Research in social psychology consistently reinforces this, that individuals who use silence strategically are perceived by others as more confident, more thoughtful, and more authoritative than those who rush to fill every gap in the conversation. Someone who has built this habit knows all of this instinctively. They sit in those 4 seconds not with discomfort, but with curiosity, watching what the other person does when the silence is not rescued, listening to what they volunteer when the space is not filled for them, gathering the intelligence that only flows when someone else has decided they are more uncomfortable with the quiet than with giving things away. A negotiation expert can remain silent after stating a price, letting the counterpart fill the void with their own concessions. A leader can hold silence after a proposal is made in a meeting and watch the room reveal its actual alignments and objections without prompting. A person in a difficult conversation can pause long enough after being challenged to let the challenger elaborate themselves into inconsistency. In negotiation, in social dynamics, in the hierarchy of any room, the person most comfortable with silence holds more power than the person with the most impressive things to say. Silence is not empty. In the hands of someone who understands its mechanics, silence is the sharpest instrument in the room, and the person who knows how to hold it without flinching has already won more than half of every exchange they will ever enter. Strategy 4. Move when the timing is right, not when the emotion is hot. Among all 7 strategies, this one, moving from timing rather than from emotion, is the one most people understand in theory and almost universally fail in practice, because acting from timing requires overriding the single most powerful impulse the human nervous system generates in a moment of conflict or opportunity, which is the impulse to act right now while the feeling is at its peak, before the moment passes and the chance is gone. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that it is a common fault not to anticipate storms when the sea is calm, and this is the other side of the same strategic coin. The person who is not prepared in the calm cannot execute with precision in the storm, and the person who acts in the storm, governed by the emotional heat of the moment rather than by the patient calculation of optimal timing, makes the kinds of errors that cannot be recovered from, the harsh word that cannot be unsaid, the aggressive move that telegraphs desperation and costs them the negotiating position they needed, the reactive decision that trades long-term advantage for the momentary satisfaction of having responded immediately. He also wrote that when you need to make a hard move, to cut ties, to end an arrangement, to deliver difficult news or a decisive action, do it quickly and without emotional theatrics. This sounds at first like it contradicts the instruction to wait for the right timing. It does not. What Machiavelli was describing is a 2-phase approach: the patient, careful waiting for the moment that is strategically optimal, followed by the clean, decisive execution of the move in that moment without hesitation or drawn-out drama. Prolonged uncertainty is its own form of weakness, and a leader who cannot end things cleanly and move forward is a leader who has allowed the discomfort of the moment to govern them. Choose the moment deliberately, then act within it without apology. The psychology of this is documented in the research on stress and decision-making. The stress-induced deliberation to intuition model, documented across multiple peer-reviewed psychological journals, establishes that under emotional pressure, the brain shifts processing authority from the prefrontal cortex, which handles deliberate and strategic cognition, to the amygdala, which handles fast, reactive, emotionally driven responses. This shift produces predictable and systematic errors in judgment that would not occur under calmer conditions. Confirmation bias amplified, long-term consequences underweighted, short-term emotional relief overvalued. The person acting from emotional heat is not making a strategic decision. They are making a biological one, and the biology is not optimized for winning. A research paper published examining executive decision-making under pressure established something Machiavelli would have recognized immediately, that the leaders who performed best under crisis conditions were not the ones who acted fastest, but the ones who had built the habit of creating deliberate space between provocation and response, who had trained themselves to feel the full force of the emotional charge without immediately becoming that charge, who could register anger or urgency or fear without letting those states make the decisions that those states were not equipped to make well. This is not the suppression of emotion. It is the disciplined use of it. Feeling it accurately as information, then returning to the part of the mind that can use that information strategically. Machiavelli knew this. His framework was built on the recognition that the ruler who can delay their response, who can absorb a provocation without immediately becoming the provocation's most cooperative victim, who can hold the position while the other party burns energy on reactive fury. This ruler arrives at the moment of action with full cognitive capacity, full strategic clarity, and all the intelligence they gathered while the other side was performing. Move when you have chosen to move, not when the emotion has chosen for you. That distinction is the distance between winning and losing in almost every high-stakes situation you will ever face. Strategy 5. Guard your reputation like it is the only weapon that survives everything else. Machiavelli was ruthless about this in a way that seemed extreme to his contemporaries, and seems clear-eyed to anyone who has watched how human social systems actually work. He wrote that a good reputation is a fortress that fewer forces can demolish, and that everything a person does in a position of power or influence either builds or erodes this fortress, one interaction at a time, whether they are watching the effect or not. Reputation is not what you say about yourself. It is the accumulated sum of what other people have said about you when you were not in the room. The pattern of experiences others have had in your presence, compressed into a few words, passed quietly and efficiently through every social network you inhabit. It arrives in rooms before you do. It shapes how people receive everything you say before you have said it. It opens doors that are closed to people of equal skill who have let their reputation drift without deliberate attention, and it closes doors to people of greater skill whose reputation carries the wrong frequency. Machiavelli understood that reputation operates on a deeply irrational but completely predictable psychology, that once a person's reputation is established in a particular direction, it functions as a filter through which everything that person subsequently does is interpreted. The leader with a reputation for decisive competence will have their hesitation read as strategic calculation. The leader with a reputation for weakness will have the same hesitation read as indecision. The same behavior, interpreted through opposite lenses, produces opposite responses from the room. This is not fair. It is not logical. It is how human perception actually works when reputation has done its work. And the strategist who understands this builds their reputation not as an afterthought, but as a primary strategic priority, knowing that a solid reputation makes every subsequent action easier to execute and easier to defend. The most common way people destroy their reputation is not through a single catastrophic act. It is through the slow accumulation of small inconsistencies, The times they said they would do something and did not. The times they spoke carelessly about someone in the wrong company. The times they let frustration override the self-possession that their reputation had been built to convey. Machiavelli wrote about this as the management of appearances over time. The recognition that you are always being evaluated, that the social world has no off hours, and that the version of yourself you present in the moments you believe no one is paying close attention is the version that does the most damage to the fortress when those moments are collected and compared. There is also the matter of how you speak about others. Machiavelli warned against the ruler who criticizes publicly and impulsively, not out of concern for the person being criticized, but out of strategic self-interest. The person who regularly speaks poorly of others in company signals something precise and uncomfortable to everyone listening, that they are the kind of person who does this, and that the next person they are alone with should probably wonder what they say about them behind closed doors. The reputation that forms around someone who speaks carelessly is not the reputation of a powerful person. It is the reputation of an unsafe one, and unsafe people are avoided by the very people whose alliance they most need. Someone operating at this level treats every interaction as part of the permanent record, not because they are paranoid, but because they understand that consistency is the material out of which genuine authority is made. The person who is the same in low-stakes moments as they are in high-stakes ones, who shows the same composure, the same thoughtfulness, the same care for their word and their behavior, whether or not the moment seems to matter, builds a reputation that cannot be dismantled by gossip or by a bad day or by a single mistake, because the architecture of consistent behavior surrounding it is too solid for any single crack to bring down. Strategy 6. Study human nature as a daily practice, not as an occasional curiosity. Machiavelli spent his life doing this. Before he wrote a word of The Prince, he had spent 15 years as a diplomat and government official in Florence, traveling on diplomatic missions to France, Germany, and the courts of the Italian states, watching how people with real power actually behaved in real situations, not how they said they behaved, not how the official record described their behavior, but the actual mechanics of how they moved, what they responded to, what they feared, what they wanted, and what the distance between those two things revealed about who they actually were beneath the performance of who they claimed to be. He wrote in The Prince that men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. He wrote this not to condemn people, but to describe them accurately, because an accurate description of human nature is the only foundation on which strategic navigation of human relationships can be built. The person who operates from a flattering but inaccurate model of how people work will be surprised, repeatedly and painfully, by behavior that anyone with a more honest model would have seen coming from a significant distance. What Machiavelli was describing is the practice of reading people at the level of their actual motivations, rather than their stated ones. Most people move through the world taking others largely at face value, accepting the explanation that is offered, the loyalty that is performed, the friendship that is displayed, and only discovering the gap between the performance and the reality when the conditions that made the performance useful to the performer have changed. The colleague who is supportive when you are struggling becomes unavailable when you are succeeding and might outpace them. The friend who championed your goals when they were safely hypothetical becomes subtly discouraging when those goals begin to materialize. The ally who professed loyalty when the alliance cost them nothing begins to find reasons to distance themselves when maintaining it becomes expensive. None of this is exceptional human darkness. It is ordinary human self-interest operating in the way Machiavelli documented with precision. People support what supports them, and withdraw when supporting you begins to cost more than it returns. The quiet strategist does not wait for that discovery. They are continuously, patiently, curiously observing the pattern, watching where a person's stated priorities and their actual behavior diverge, tracking what happens to someone's warmth and availability when they no longer need anything from you, noticing whose counsel shifts depending on who is in the room. In practice, building this as a daily discipline looks like this. You stop being surprised by the gap between what people say and what they do, and you start treating that gap as information. You begin noticing, in every significant relationship in your life, the moments when a person's words and their actions point in different directions, and instead of resolving the tension by defaulting to the words, you default to the actions, because behavior is the one form of human communication that is always more honest than speech. You watch how people treat people who can do nothing for them. You watch what happens to their opinions when the authority in the room shifts. You watch who they become when they think they are not being observed. Call it what it actually is, not suspicion, but intelligence. It is the deliberate collection of accurate information about human behavior, in place of the comforting but inaccurate assumption that people are consistently who they say they are, in all circumstances, and regardless of incentive. The person who understands what actually drives the people around them, not what those people claim drives them, but what the observable evidence of their choices reveals, is the person who can predict those people's behavior before they exhibit it, position themselves accordingly before the movement happens, and never be genuinely surprised by a betrayal that was always, in retrospect, telegraphed by 100 small signs that a less observant person walked past without seeing. Strategy 7. Let your moves speak. Your words never need to. Everything Machiavelli wrote across the prints, the discourses, and the art of war converges on a single operational truth that cuts through all the complexity of political theory and behavioral science alike. That in the end, the person who executes consistently speaks louder than the person who declares constantly, that results carry more authority than promises, that the quiet reputation of someone who reliably does what they said they would do outweighs, in every social and professional context that matters, the loud reputation of someone who regularly says impressive things and delivers something lesser. Machiavelli wrote that actions should appear natural, effortless, and calm. The Italian concept of sprezzatura, the art of making difficult things appear easy, of showing only the finished work and never the labor that produced it, of moving through the world with the composed grace of someone who is prepared so thoroughly that the preparation has become invisible. This is the highest form of competence, the kind that has been so completely internalized that it no longer requires conscious management. The kind that other people experience not as a performance, but as a presence. The person who needs to explain their accomplishments at length is the person who is not certain those accomplishments speak clearly enough on their own. The person whose work lands without a preceding announcement and a following explanation has something the first person does not. The quiet confidence that the thing itself was enough, that the result was sufficient, that the audience does not need a guide to understand what they are seeing. This is the quality that Machiavelli identified in the most durable holders of power he studied, not the ones who were most vocal about their capabilities, but the ones whose consistent execution created a reputation so solid that their capabilities were assumed rather than argued for. The loud performer announces every move before making it, explains every decision after making it, and seeks acknowledgement at every stage of every process, because the acknowledgement is part of the reward, and the reward has become inseparable from the work. This person is not wrong to want recognition. The problem is that seeking it at every stage of every process broadcasts something specific and costly about their relationship to their own confidence. It says that the internal verdict on whether this was worth doing is not available until the external verdict has been delivered, and that dependence is readable to everyone in the room who has made the other choice. Someone who has internalized this separates those things completely. The work is its own reward. The result is its own announcement. And in every room where both are operating simultaneously, the quiet strategist is the one everyone is actually watching, not because they demand attention, but because they do not, and the brain is wired to move toward what is not chasing it. The uncaught thing, in every animal that is ever hunted, draws more pursuit than the thing that runs toward you. People move toward self-possession. They always have. Machiavelli built this entire framework not as a philosophical exercise, but as a survival manual, from the specific experience of watching brilliant, capable, vocal people be outmaneuvered and destroyed by patient, quiet, strategically disciplined ones, from the observation that history consistently rewards the latter over the former, from the understanding that power is not taken by the loudest voice in the room, but accumulated over time by the person who understood the room better than anyone else in it, and said very little about what they understood, until understanding it had already changed the outcome. That is the game. That is what playing quiet and moving smart actually looks like. Not silence as retreat, not restraint as weakness, not patience as passivity, but all three as the most powerful strategic posture available in any human environment, because they are the postures that gather the most intelligence, expend the least energy in the wrong direction, and position the practitioner at maximum advantage for the moment when moving decisively matters most. Start building this today. Take the one situation in your life right now where you have been the loudest person, the one where you have been announcing intentions, defending positions, explaining yourself to people who have given you no particular reason to trust their response, and go quiet for 1 week. Not absent, not withdrawn, quiet, observing. Let them show you who they are in the silence you leave them. Let the situation develop without your constant management of it, and see what it reveals when you stop talking over it. You will be surprised how much information emerges from a room when you stop filling it. Take the one person in your world whose loyalty you have assumed rather than verified, the one whose warmth you have accepted at face value without checking it against the evidence of their behavior over time, and watch them for a week with the detached curiosity of someone reading a very interesting book, not with hostility, with honest attention. What do they do when the situation shifts and supporting you costs them something? What does their behavior say about what they actually value when the social performance of loyalty is removed from the equation? Watch without judgment. What you see is not a verdict on their character. It is accurate information about the nature of the relationship, and accurate information is always more useful than comfortable illusion. Take your next significant negotiation or conversation where something real is at stake, and try the 3-second pause before every response, not as a technique to telegraph, as a genuine practice of reflection, actually using those 3 seconds to hear what was just said more completely before deciding what to say in response. Notice what that pause does to the quality of your thinking. Notice what it does to the quality of the conversation. Notice whether the person across from you begins filling your silence with things you did not ask for and would not have heard if you had spoken first. There will be moments when the old pattern pulls hard, when staying quiet feels like losing, when withholding your plan feels like cowardice, when letting the other person speak first feels like giving something away. Those moments are the ones where the practice matters most, and the ones where the strategist is distinguished from the reactor. The reactor acts from feeling. The strategist acts from understanding. The distance between those two is the distance between where most people spend their lives and where the quiet, patient, deliberately moving few end up. The version of you that has been playing loud, that has been announcing plans before they were executed, explaining yourself to people who never asked for explanations, reacting from feeling instead of thinking from strategy. That version was not wrong. It was playing by the only rules it had been given, in a world that rewards performance and visibility with enough short-term attention to make the trade feel worth it. The problem is not the desire to be heard. The problem is spending your strongest energy on being heard rather than on positioning yourself to win, because those are not the same activity, and the person who conflates them pays a cost they cannot see until they look back from the distance of years and wonder why so much effort produced so little advantage. But short-term attention and long-term position are not the same game, and you have been playing the short game in a field where all the real prizes are given out at the end of the long one. Someone who has genuinely absorbed these 7 strategies moves differently through the world, not slowly, not timidly, with precision, with the unhurried certainty of someone who is not reacting to circumstances but reading them, not performing for the room but gathering from it, not burning energy on being seen but conserving it for the moment when moving will count. People sense this quality before they name it. They experience it as authority, as depth, as the kind of presence that does not demand attention but commands it. The person in the room whose stillness makes everyone else a little more alert. whose words, when they come, carry the weight of everything they did not say. That is Machiavelli's enduring gift to the person willing to actually read what he wrote and apply it honestly. Not the reputation for ruthlessness that has followed his name for 5 centuries. Not the misreading that reduced a sophisticated student of human nature to a synonym for manipulation, but the precise, practical, research-validated understanding that the world's power does not accumulate to the loudest, the most visible, or the most eager. It accumulates to the most patient, the most observant, and the most strategically quiet. Play quiet, move smart, win everything. That is not a slogan, that is a method, and every person who has ever deployed it with discipline and patience has found that the world they enter when they do looks completely different from the world they were living in before. If what you just heard hit something real in you, if you recognized yourself in the loud strategies you've been using and felt the shape of a different way of moving, drop "quiet strategist" in the comments right now. Not for the algorithm, for you, because writing it down makes it real, and making it real is where the method starts. And before you go, where in the world are you? Tell us your city and the time, because right now, someone in London is reading this at a quiet moment they carved out for themselves, and someone in Sydney is watching at the end of a long week, and someone in Calgary, in Nairobi, in Chicago is sitting with this exact feeling, that the way they have been playing the game is not working, and that a different approach is right there waiting. Say where you are. This community is built from people who are done playing loud. Welcome to it. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Every video on this channel is built to give you the psychological intelligence that changes how you actually operate. In rooms, in relationships, in every situation where the outcome matters. Go forth and be a quiet strategist.